CBS News.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
Tonight, what we're learning about the helicopter crash that killed 5 U.S. soldiers. Then, how drivers will need to adapt after a major L.A. freeway shuts down. And a heartfelt reunion for an American family whose loved one made an escape from Gaza on the CBS Evening News.
I don't think we can play political games with this to support our ally because, if they fail and we fail.
I believe that when we come together, guided by a common desire to make tomorrow better than today, we can do great things.
The court has been under calls for years to adopt this kind of formal code of conduct. The court has never had its own formal kind of ethics code.
Hello, I'm Nicole Killian in Washington, and welcome to America Decides. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are once again facing a deadline to avert a government shutdown this Friday. Over the weekend, House Speaker Mike Johnson unveiled a two-step proposal that would extend some funding through January 19th and the rest until February 2nd. But some House Republicans are pushing back on that approach. President Biden says he has not made a decision on whether to veto the bill. Nancy Cordes and Scott McFarland join us now. Nancy is CBS News chief White House correspondent, and Scott is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Scott, I want to start with you. How is Speaker Johnson trying to get this proposal over the finish line, and ultimately, will he need Democrats to do it?
Oh, this proposal is like the legislative version of that house down the street that gives out raisins on Halloween instead of candy. The kids don't want it. The kids aren't enthused about it, but eventually, when everything else is gone, the kids might eat it. There have been Democrats who've called this proposal bizarre and reckless, but they haven't called it dead. It is clean. There are no major cuts to any programs. There's no controversial policies added, but it's got this strange dynamic, Nicole, where it has 1/3 of the government funded through January, the other 2/3, including the Pentagon, through February, and that has struck people as weird or untenable. But it's become increasingly clear as the evening begins here that it's going to need to be a bipartisan group. There are not the sufficient Republican votes to do this alone. One of them is Chip Roy of Texas on the House Rules Committee, who may put opposition toward even the rule passing, who spoke earlier today. Take a listen.
For the same reasons that, I opposed the CR on October 1st, I opposed a CR that the current Speaker Johnson, is putting forward, because it continues to perpetuate the very system my constituents sent me here to oppose.
So now there's the question of whether the rule even passes. Will Republicans vote to get this thing to a floor debate tomorrow? I know that's some inside baseball, but it's pretty important because if it does not, Speaker Johnson needs not only a majority, he would need 2 of every 3 members of the House to get this thing passed. Anything is possible over the next 24 hours.
Well, we'll try to keep that optimism, Scott. Meantime, President Biden had this to say when asked about a possible shutdown.
With regard to a potential shutdown, I understand that the new Speaker of the House has a proposal. It's being negotiated with the Minority Leader of the House and Senator Schumer and the Republican leader are also talking about it. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I'm not going to make a judgment what I'd veto, what I'd sign. But let's wait and see what they come up with.
So, Nancy, the White House has called this proposal a recipe for chaos and unserious. Why wouldn't the president potentially veto it?
Well, reading between the lines, Nicole, of what White House officials were saying today, it appears that they're still trying to negotiate with leaders in the House and Senate, trying to figure out some way to keep the lights on, keep the government funded, at least in the short term, and in a perfect world, also provide new funding for Israel and Ukraine. They haven't given up on that possibility yet, and so they aren't willing to wield that veto threat yet. But make no mistake, if we get to later in the week and those negotiations don't bear fruit, it is entirely possible at that point that the president will come to a decision about how he feels and issue a veto threat. I asked the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, today about the possibility of a shutdown when you've got the White House engaged in conflicts now both in Israel and in Ukraine. He said it would be devastating for the military in particular if you've got members of the military who aren't getting their full paychecks and who are living with great uncertainty even as they are assisting in these war zones.
The U.S. is now focused on 2 wars, one in the Middle East, one in Ukraine. What would it mean for this government, and in particular foreign policy and the military, if there were to be a government shutdown come Friday night?
This would be a devastating blow, first of all, to our service members at a very human level, because it would have an impact on the ability of our troops and their families to get all of the benefits and services that they deserve for the service that they are performing for our country.
So this is going to be something that the White House is watching very closely this week, Nicole, even as the president heads to California to meet with the Chinese president.
Yeah, very busy week ahead. Scott, switching gears a bit, the Supreme Court just announced it will institute a new ethics code after several justices came under scrutiny for accepting lavish trips and gifts. What reaction are you hearing on the Hill, especially from those on the Senate Judiciary Committee who had called for reform?
I've heard the phrase "a good start" a lot from Democrats who've been pressuring the Supreme Court to do just this. They like that there's a codified version of these policies and best practices to avoid the justices running afoul of conflicts of interest, of running afoul of things that look bad optically or in practical senses for the Supreme Court. But there's no enforcement, according to some of the leading Senate Democrats. If these best practices, if these procedures, if this code is violated, well, what's the stick? And ultimately, they're saying there isn't one there. So I would expect a continued push from Senate Democrats to pass some of these proposed new laws, which would not only put a code of conduct in place, but put an enforcement mechanism with a panel of other judges to determine what the punishment or penalties will be for violations.
And Nancy, turning to some other developments involving the White House, a Secret Service agent on Naomi Biden's detail fired a weapon during a car break-in. What more do we know about this incident?
Nicole, this took place late on Sunday night. The president's granddaughter, Naomi Biden, lives in Georgetown, a couple of miles away from the White House where we're standing right now. She was not outside when this happened, but apparently her security detail spotted a few individuals trying to break the window of an unmarked Secret Service vehicle. There was some kind of encounter. One of the officers discharged their weapon, and the suspects fled the scene in a red sedan. And the incident is now being investigated. It doesn't appear anyone was hurt, but anytime a Secret Service officer discharges their weapon, there has to be an investigation. So that's what's taking place right now, involving both the D.C. police and the Secret Service. And it all takes place amid a broader backdrop of increased crime here in Washington, D.C. Car thefts, carjackings are up by about 100% since last year. Violent crime is way up as well. And there's no indication at this point that the suspects even realized that they were breaking into a Secret Service vehicle.
All right, Nancy Cordes and Scott McFarland, good to see you as always. The GOP presidential field is now down to 7. Late Sunday night, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott announced that he was suspending his bid for president. Scott lagged far behind the frontrunner, former President Donald Trump, and failed to crack double digits in the polls. CBS News political director Finn Gomez joins us now. And Finn, I understand you have some new reporting about how this all went down. What can you tell us?
So as we saw yesterday, that Senator Scott did announce that he was suspending his campaign, dropping out of the race, taking his surprise. Even some senior staffers were taken aback because they were not expecting it. One said that they were shocked that he announced it.
How is it that they didn't know?
They didn't know. Look, he's been low in the polls, like 4% nationally in our latest poll. But, he still had money. There was no talk of it within the campaign, so it shocked them. They didn't see it coming. So it was unexpected. But since then, what CBS has learned through a source familiar with the calls that Scott has received some phone calls from who? What do you think, Nicole? From several of his former rivals, including Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, who texted the fellow South Carolinian, as well as some others, including Chris Christie, who have reached out to the senator. There was no talk of an endorsement in these discussions, according to the source. However, he is essentially keeping his powder dry.
I mean, why isn't he going to make an endorsement, at least for now? He seemed to indicate that last night.
Well, I mean, it seems to me, speaking to my sources, that it's a little early, right? And within this race, within the constructs of this current race and how it is going right now, Donald Trump is still the dominant front runner, right? If he endorses someone else and they don't do very well in Iowa, which is the Iowa caucus are 62 days away from today, it's sort of like not really a worthwhile endorsement. So in some parts of the Republican Party, he is being discussed as a potential VP shortlister if Donald Trump does become the nominee. So that is an interesting thing that we should continue watching. But I think, it took many in the field by surprise. We'll see what he does next.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that, taking, people by surprise here, what does his exit and former Vice President Mike Pence's recent exit from the race, what does it mean for the state of this GOP primary? I mean, because these are two very established politicians, well-liked, well-respected, that are now gone. Well, I think if you're looking at the current trajectory of the race, someone who does have momentum is Nikki Haley, right? Currently, according to the latest polls. There's hope within the Haley camp that some of the Scott endorsements, some of the Scott support, including that donor base, which they share the same donor base, and some of that establishment wing of the Pence supporters goes to Haley. So that is the expectation. We'll see. But there's really, right now, really not an appetite larger than currently, if you look at the polls, by the Republican base for it's really Donald Trump and the rest of the field. Let's see if that shrinks in the next 62 days before we get to Iowa. Yeah, I was going to say, well, what do you think is going to happen in the next couple of weeks before this debate in Alabama? Right, and that's the thing. Part of it is that he barely made the stage, Scott barely made the stage in Miami, right? There was some criticism from the DeSantis camp saying that the RNC sort of changed the criteria so he can make the stage. So it was unlikely that he was going to make the Alabama debate because it's a higher threshold. So now it's a smaller field. Of those 7 that we named earlier in the show, only 5 of them would have made the stage. So we're looking, it's going to be a little bit stricter now. Let's see, it's going to be a shorter field. Donald Trump is still not going to show up, according to sources you tell CBS. So will it matter? A lot of people in the Republican Party are asking that question. All right, Finn Gomez, thank you so much, as always, for being with us. History is made in Rhode Island. Coming up after the break, we'll talk to the newest lawmaker representing the Ocean State who's breaking barriers. You're streaming America Decides.
Well, let me start with this.
This really happened. Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's
keep
wrong
going?
with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
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 It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
So if we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
You had a substitute teacher that was pretty popular. What was his reputation?
Everyone loved him.
You had to miss a test. What did he offer to have you make up the test?
He said that I can come by after school was all over and just take the exam. The blinds were down. He closed the door. The next thing I knew, he was right next to me. That's when I realized what was going to happen. Even if I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, no one would hear me because no one was there. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, he would kill me and he would kill my family. So I did it.
Pledge of Silence, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Why did you miss the moment?
I'm not sure why they missed the moment.
It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil conversation with perspective.
Welcome back to America Decides. The House Democratic Caucus is gaining one new member after last week's special election in Rhode Island. This comes as Congress has just days to avert a government shutdown. Democratic Congressman-elect Gabe Amo of Rhode Island joins us now. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. You are entering Congress on the brink of a potential government shutdown. What do you make of this two-step continuing resolution, and will you support it?
Well, first off, Nicole, thanks for having me on. Ultimately, when I look at our responsibility as a Congress, as a House, is to put forward a plan that is free of gimmicks and that services the priorities of making sure that our seniors are taken care of, that those in the military are taken care of, and those who are working in our government. So I think any gimmicks in terms of passing a full year budget are not acceptable for this moment.
So does that mean you're a no?
I'm going to do my work, my homework. As you know, I'm getting sworn in tonight. And so I'm going to dig in deeply and figure out what the pathway is to making sure that we avert a shutdown. That's the priority. And so it doesn't seem like this is a good faith effort, and in fact is something that may be a hindrance to us actually meeting this week's deadline.
The Speaker has made clear that he's not going to bring up emergency supplemental foreign aid, at least for now, that he's going to table that and deal with it separately. As you know, the House has already passed a standalone Israel aid bill. There's also some talk of making Ukraine aid contingent on dealing with border security. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I would say we have an obligation at this time of great instability in the global theater to service our ally and our priorities in Israel, to make sure that in Ukraine we are continuing the fight of democracy, for democracy, and that we are addressing the burgeoning challenges of the South China Sea and the issues around our border. So it seems to me that, again, this is an example of not meeting the moment. We need those in positions of leadership to meet the moment in servicing our challenges. And unfortunately, we don't have that in the plan put forward by the House Republicans.
And when it comes to the border, we are seeing a record numbers of illegal crossings. As you probably know, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has been leading an effort to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. What is your reaction to that, and how do you think the border should be addressed?
I certainly don't believe that pursuing an extreme partisan tactic of impeachment is actually solving the problem that we are looking to address. Yes, in fact, we do need to pay attention to the border. We do need to provide the resources that are necessary with increased border control officers, with making sure that we are doing our best to make our immigration courts and asylum process function. That requires resources. That requires what we should see put forward in a supplemental. Unfortunately, we see more partisan political games. So I do not support a vote for impeachment of the Homeland Security Secretary. That doesn't address what we need to solve for at the border.
We know border and immigration will be among many key issues, along with the economy, as we head into 2024. I know you just won an election, so you probably don't want to think about another one, but several recent polls, including our own, have shown President Biden trailing former President Trump in a potential general election matchup, as well as in some key battleground states. As someone who previously worked for the Obama administration, how concerned are you about some of those numbers? And do you think President Biden should be the Democratic nominee?
Look, when you look at polling, polls go up, polls go down. But what is clear to me is that there is a record of achievement of investing in people and places around this country that President Biden and Vice President Harris have led on. If you look back to 2011, you see poll numbers for President Obama in isolation when there isn't the dust cleared from the Republican primary field being, quite similar to where we see President Biden. So ultimately, the results that President Biden has delivered are going to be what we focus on, and telling those narratives, telling that story of progress is what we'll focus on. And I am certain President Biden will prevail against the extremism of MAGA Republicans and former President Trump.
With your election and swearing in, you become the first Black lawmaker to represent Rhode Island. You're also the 60th member of the Congressional Black Caucus, which is a record for the organization. What does that mean to you personally, and what do you hope to accomplish as you begin your term?
Well, I am so grateful to be in this moment. I certainly stand on the shoulders of so many who came before me in Rhode Island and around the country on that march for civil rights, to have every voice, every seat filled at the table with a range of perspectives that reflect this country. And so what it means to me is that I've got work to do. I've got to live up to the promise of the opportunity at hand, and I look forward to being that 60th vote for the Congressional Black Caucus, being a part of the House Democratic Caucus, and serving the people of the 1st Congressional District of Rhode Island who sent me here to work hard for them. And so as far as what I hope to accomplish, it is a continued focus on investing in people and places in the district, making sure that there are jobs in the supply chains of the future, that we are fighting gun violence, and that we are doing everything we can to ensure retirement security for our seniors. But at the end of the day, I'm going to put my head down, get to work, and I am so grateful for this opportunity and this moment to serve people in my home community.
All right, Congressman-elect Gabe Amo, thank you so much for being with us, and welcome to the Capitol.
Thank you, Nicole.
Senator Joe Manchin's decision to not run for re-election is adding new uncertainty for Democrats. Next, we analyze the 2024 Senate landscape. You're streaming America Decides.
Our story's just begun.
Why did you want to share your story?
Water up this high?
Where are these coming from?
That's the million-dollar question.
I'm a very curious person. I wake up every morning asking what's happening in the world, why is this happening, and how do we answer that question on the CBS Evening News.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
but with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We aim every night to be factual and fair. That's our goal.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Since childhood, she never stopped reaching for the skies. Now she's spent more time in space than any other American.
I like being a part of something bigger than me.
Peggy Whitson's extraordinary career as a history-making astronaut when we go person to person.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I think I asked direct questions. I don't know that they're tough questions per se. Why aren't you holding yourself to that standard? It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. What has to happen? That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. And that means a civil conversation with perspective.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Democrats have their eyes on several states that could be crucial in maintaining the Senate majority. The race for Arizona has gained national attention, where Democrat-turned-independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema has not yet announced if she will seek another term. Political reporter for the Associated Press, Michelle Price, joins us now. Michelle, thanks so much for being with us. Do you think that Senator Sinema will run for re-election, and what would that mean for the dynamic of the race?
I mean, that's the really big question here. She's been outraised so far by the Democratic challenger, Ruben Gallego, but she is sitting on a fair amount of money if she does choose to run. She's running out of time to make a decision, though. But, I mean, if she does, we're looking at potentially a three-way split of the vote here. Democrats would be very nervous about that, that some of the support that might have gone for the Democratic candidate might peel off in her direction. It's a state where there's been a long history of independent voters, moderate voters, and that would potentially clear the way for a Republican candidate, maybe Carrie Lake, who very narrowly lost her race for governor last year, to win that seat and flip that seat.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you can expand more on that front, just both on the impact on the Democratic side and the Republican side, not just with respect to vote splitting, but just how her entry into the race, or if she decides not to run, what impact that might have on either side.
Yeah, if she decides not to run, this will be a marginally easier mission for Democrats. This is still going to be a very tough race for them no matter what. They have a tough map next year, and this is always going to be a close race. Whether the candidate is Carrie Lake, somebody who was on the further to the right, she was very aligned with Donald Trump. She's not anyone's idea of a moderate Republican, but she still, again, very narrowly lost that race. So this was already going to be tough for Democrats. But Arizonans have prided themselves on an independent streak. It's for the place of John McCain. So there are certainly people in the middle who might find Kyrsten Sinema, if she decides to run, they feel more comfortable with that, and they like the idea of somebody who is something of a maverick.
I mean, you've talked about the amount of money that Senator Sinema has raised. Why hasn't she announced yet?
That's the question we're all trying to understand at this point. I mean, she has the means to start running if she wants to, but that window is closing. And in the meantime, Ruben Gallego, who is running to her left as the Democratic candidate, is running like he's running against her. And he has been outraising her in the last few quarters. So if she is intending to run, she is really running out of time to jump into the race. But it's possible she might be making a calculation like Senator Manchin did, looking at, you know, the vote she took, this kind of moderate stance that she took in the Senate, making some certain deals, sometimes bucking her party, that she might think that this is just not in the cards for her. You know, we saw she worked a lot with Senator Romney, who's also not running for re-election, and Manchin.
Yeah, and I was going to say to that point, I mean, those are two senators that she has actually worked relatively closely with on various legislation. I mean, looking, for instance, at West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin's announcement last week that he will not run for re-election. What kind of decision might that have on Senator Sinema? I mean, could it have any bearing on her own decision, do you think?
It's possible. I mean, it's one less close ally that she would have. But then again, she has always kind of seemed to be a bit of an independent, that she has not been running, seeking friends in her actions. You know, she's kind of struck out in her own lane. So she might be looking at just kind of the map he was looking at, the kind of spending that the Democrats are looking to do in 2024. Maybe that's part of her calculation, but it's really unclear, and we'll have to wait to hear from her.
All right, Michelle Price with the Associated Press. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And that does it for today here on America Decides. You can stream the show Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. For now, you're streaming CBS News.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding